Greetings and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the languages of myth and lore, sky and star, earth and embodiment through astrology, art, and spirit engagement. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Okay, hello, greetings, and welcome back to the show. Today we have with us astrologer from Newfoundland, Elodie Miaow. Hey, how you doing, Elodie?
Good, how you doing?
Great, fantastic. And so we've been chatting a little bit before we got recording here. So, and I'd seen an Instagram post this morning that you put up, and the question was, why so flashy? And I figured that would maybe be a good first question.
What's the question? Why so flashy?
Yeah.
Yeah, just so the picture was a picture of an eggshell that's like turquoise, and the landscape here is really just brown and green, like very dull colors around this time of year. And I was just wondering how a little tiny bird could have such a flashy shell, and how dangerous really that is for the bird.
Oh yeah, how dangerous. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder why that is, like to want to stick out like that and be to be so flashy.
I was hoping that one of my Instagram friend would be like into birds and know the answer, because right. I'm sure there's a biological reason for those eggs to be so bright. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, need an ornithologist like on Instagram to kind of chime in. But
yeah, exactly. It's very tropical looking. Like, it's very colorful, bright turquoise, which like you don't find these colors in nature usually, but not like maybe some other place, but not here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we don't have, I think part of the reason why I like just kind of charged in with that question is because we both live, and we talked about this, like communicating before recording, like kind of adjacent to the Atlantic in the east of North America, you much further east than I, but yeah, talking a lot about like rural living and landscape and how that kind of plays into our astrological practice. But yeah, I like, and just what the landscape is like and how it gets in our psyche. And yeah, here there's like, I know we have staghorn sumac. Do you have that there?
A little bit, but not very much. It's more the boreal forest here, so it's very much like spruce trees and like balsam fir. There's not many. How do you say, like tree with leaves?
Deciduous trees.
Yeah, deciduous. It's really. Do you guys have the boreal down there in Maine?
Yeah, it's like transitional. Yeah.
But you have a lot more greens, I feel like.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, but I brought up staghorn sumac because it really stands out. It's native, but it looks very, very tropical, and we get like that like bright red color from it, or like a deep red. And then sometimes we get like fireweed that's like along streams and things like that. That's like a really startling red color, like kind of
fuchsia.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have fireweed here too.
But other than that, like you see a robin's egg and it blows your mind, like or sometimes we get like a kind of like fungus, like a mycelium, like kind of in like a rotted log. That's a similar color.
The turquoise color?
Yeah.
Cool. We have like the brightest fungus here would be witch's butter, which is like bright orange and rubbery.
Yeah. Do you ever eat that?
No. No, we have hedgehog and chanterelle that I eat, and chaga, and that's about a few boletus, but the slugs usually get to them first here. But I did work on the west coast of Canada for a long time in BC, and there's a lot of really cool mushroom out there too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a whole different scene. Yeah, I eat the witch's butter, even though it's like,
Do you?
it's not bad for you and it's not good for you. It's just like has a lot of water content, but it's a fun way to kind of like just be digesting something that's like speaking through the forest, and kind of just taking part.
Absolutely. I'm all about eating the land for sure. I think like that's one of the best thing about like we were talking about material locality, like kind of settling in and crystallizing into landscape and the place where you live, especially when you're living rural. And I think like eating what is around you is one of the best way to do that, because you're sort of becoming part of that landscape by ingesting it.
Yeah, literally like replacing your cells with some of the cells of that's like what's the place that's hosting you.
Yeah, and also I find it's just easier to communicate with your surrounding and know what your surrounding wants if you're actually, sort of communing in that way with it. And I just really like that idea. I was actually picking nettle for the last couple of days because it's growing a lot right now here. And yeah, it makes me so happy to just be eating the food from where I'm walking every day and where I live.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so have you always lived rural?
Yeah, pretty much. My parents were not city people, so we always sort of lived outside of town. I moved around a lot growing up. I was born in Quebec, and my mom wanted to be a midwife, but it was illegal in Quebec back in the 90s. Yeah. And the first university program was in Ontario, which is the province next door to Quebec. And so when I was 14, we moved to Northern Ontario. I didn't speak one word of English, and it was sort of kind of traumatic a little bit coming from like East Quebec, just completely francophone. And my mom studied at the university there, and then we moved to Ottawa. She finished her midwifery studies in Ottawa, and so I went to high school in Ottawa, but I was living outside in the boonies, so I was like one of the kids from the boonies all the time, which was perfectly fine with me. I love being in nature. And then I lived in Montreal a little bit in my early 20s, and then I started cooking on tree planting camp at 23 and met a Newfoundlander, and then the rest is history. I've been here for 15 years in Newfoundland. I lived very, very isolated in my 20s without electricity or running water or cell phone or anything. And now I'm like more in the countryside, not so isolated, and we have solar panel, we're producing electricity, we have a well, so it's definite upgrade.
Yeah. So so it's hard to ask this question to someone who's kind of always been rural, but why live rural? Or like why are you drawn to living rural?
I think, well, I could explain it astrologically.
Yeah, sure.
I think just having a moon in Taurus, there's something very rustic about, I guess, just, having a moon in Taurus, there's an attraction to, like, the simple peace that comes with nature. There's just this connection, I think, for me that makes me feel really zen. Uh-huh. I said I lived in Montreal in my early 20s, and that's probably the time in my life where I was the most miserable. I was really, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like in an existentialist crisis, just like, what is the point of existence? I don't know. I don't want to participate in this rat race, society. I was just so confused. And then as soon as I moved to Newfoundland into the woods with my partner, I was like, oh, that was the only problem. I don't need to figure it out. I just needed to be in nature. It just completely appeased my soul, and I'm not an ambitious person by nature. I'm very easily satisfied with simple pleasure, and I think being in nature just gives me that purpose, gives me that connection, and I just don't need to participate in the or yeah, I don't have that such a strong desire to participate in like the economy and all of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think.
Even yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even though like you can't, yeah, you have to. I can't deny society. I'm part of it. I'm on the internet. I'm talking to you via the web. So it's a utopic idea to think that you can completely not participate. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that we talked about, like kind of like what is it like to live rurally as an astrologer, and that experience of kind of being like outside of like cultural nexus like that, but then able to be a part of it because of technology, and like it's interesting to kind of look at things from the outside, but like have this ability to like now with like how like digital networks are be really participatory.
Absolutely. I think it's wonderful. In my 20s, not having connection, not having a social connection to anyone. I was living with my partner, really isolated. I suffered a lot from that isolation and not having connection with friends and like community. And now, because of internet and me be practicing astrology and connecting with the community, I'm just completely nourished by that. So I don't know, it makes a huge difference, so I would not deny that. But the other thing I kind of intuit coming into the near future is I think a lot more people will try to go back to nature, or maybe build like what are they called, the small house, tiny houses.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that because of the internet and how the economy is changing via the internet, I feel like a lot more people will kind of adopt this lifestyle. It seems to be around the corner.
Yeah, I agree. And in this way that, like, I don't know if it might be similar to some of your experiences, but where I live, like living in a rural place, but having it be like a completely collapsed economy, and a lot of people up to no good, like around here, and having the kind of, because of like the distribution of digital economies and those kind of like ability to network and kind of be more autonomous. Like, there's like these platforms that would be like, oh, you can run you have a good idea here, you can run a whole business. Here's a bunch of templates, and giving people something to do, like a way to like move kind of monetary units around that isn't maybe necessarily traditional capital, but it might like kind of reach out into the rural areas where people would rather be anyway. And the kind of return to like the village where people can like kind of can live away from the big superstructures and the rat race, but also be able to have like the things around them where they can like congregate. Like, because where I live, there's just gas stations, you know what I mean? Like, and then nothing else. Like, I can't like walk to a general store or ride a bike to a general store or something like that,
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty lucky here. I've been in this place for 8 years, and there's been a huge development in regards to organic farming around here. So I have a couple of friends doing organic farming, and then so there is this sort of flourishing of rurality. But rural Newfoundland is a little bit different than rural, I would imagine, on the continent. Just because Newfoundland is rural.
Yeah, right.
And it's an island, so there's something about being on an island already. I don't know. It's very rural in that sense, but I'm close to St. John's, which is the capital. So there's still a lot of things going on culturally. I can imagine the landscape you live in that you're describing to me. And when I lived in central Newfoundland in my 20s, it was like that too. There was absolutely nothing. It took me 2 hours to get into my place. It was just a forest and caribous and moose, and there was just nothing.
There's stuff going on like 35 minutes from where I am, but it's not like, I'm imagining like what you're saying about like kind of the future of where things might be going, with like more people like having a rural lifestyle and smaller houses, like being able to kind of autonomously set up like more kind of like village kind of setting.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
like I think that's like an important one, like the return of the pub that's not the sports bar, you know, return of like the public house and like the general store in the center piece of an area. And there could be, they can just kind of spurt up and fruit on their own. They don't have to be kind of organized by like private capital or something.
Yeah, I think this sort of started in the 60s. I know in Quebec, anyway, there was a lot of return to nature movement. Like, people were doing communes and wanted to do gardening and all of that. Like, I sort of grew up with hippie parents like that, and a lot of friends that gravitated around my parents were sort of like that. But it's funny because if you look at a lot of the organic companies, like cereal companies, or I don't know, Burt's Bees and stuff like that, I think it started with these ideas, and then it just became completely capitalist, like completely like a mega structure. It's almost like with time and necessity, people just kind of turn to, like, I don't know, you can have like big ideas about not participating or living a simple life and being a hermit and studying and dedicating yourself to spiritual practice, but eventually you get older and security needs, or who knows what happens, but it seems to be a sort of wave. And I feel like right now it's sort of a repeat of the 60s in that sense. Like, a lot of people want to return to nature, want simpler ingredients, local, they want to farm, better materials, because it seems it's just not sustainable. We know this. And I feel like our parents sort of already did a little bit of that in the 60s, 70s, and then it went completely mainstream, and then we're doing this again a little bit, and who knows with Pluto and Aquarius what will be,
Yeah, totally. That's I guess what I was kind of driving at is like, that's definitely the narrative around here. It's like the area I live in is like Waldo County, Maine, and is totally the like ground zero of organic farming, back to the lander kind of narrative, and like, Burt's Bees isn't like from very far away from here, and like,
no way, really? Oh, that's funny.
And like, but this time around, after like the we get the Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions in air signs instead, and we move into this like next air era in earnest, like in 2020, like what, like, everyone has these compulsions to get back to nature, but this time around they're not going to necessarily run into the traditional like materialist like economic hierarchies as much, and run into a different kind of like autonomous kind of setup, like that's kind of facilitated by whatever the digital marketplace facilitates at this point, which we're not even sure like which direction that's going to take, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be the same narrative as before, as like you're saying, is like, you're like, oh yeah, they had really good intentions, but then these larger conglomerates kind of bought them out or ate them up or something, or like money was an issue, and that's just how it goes. It seems like there might be the opportunity just kind of to capitalize in a sense on their thing without having it kind of just be like clicking up into like a bigger machine or something.
Yeah, it's like the potential for individuality is a lot higher with the internet. It's definitely, I can run my business on internet right now, have clients all over the world, and I'm just autonomous in what I'm doing as an astrologer, so, and I would have never been able to do that just like 20 years ago. Yeah,
same. It's bonkers, right? When you're like out like looking at the robin's egg and you're like, oh, I better go home and like deal with my clients,
Yeah, prep my consultation, which is, I'm super thankful for it. It's a lot of computer time and stuff, but that's the other thing I was just going to say about like the direction of the digital world. The 5G network that's going to be implemented supposedly is going to run like 1 million faster than the internet we know.
Wow.
And supposedly now they're saying it's going to completely change the way we do things. There's so many levels. There's so many layers with the 5G. I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's it's sort of fascinating to speculate what will become of that technology. The other side of it is the physical aspect of 5G is actually really damaging and has been proven time and time again. It's damaging for the physical environment. So, and to people, to living creatures around the network. So all these mutation, I can just almost like see all these mutation arising from having super fast internet, technology advancing like crazy, but also new sickness arising from like utilizing these networks, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like looking at like cycles of like kind of like epidemic, like diseases or like plagues or things like that, and being like, okay, what's like the next wave? Like the last episode I did talked a lot about like in Neptune in Aquarius, like and that generation coming to be like adult age, and you know what the next like kind of drug epidemic is going to be with like the Uranus, I mean the Aquarius like kind of version of drug epidemic, you know, and like
interesting. Yeah, I should listen to that because I've been talking a lot about that. I'm working with a lot of young people, and it seems to be that pharmaceutical is really big with the younger generation.
Yeah, and they're getting like FDA approval for like video games that are like to treat like mental and physical kind of like disorders and conditions, you know, where you're like, so this video game is like of drug strength. It's like, you know,
it's like simulation of something to deal with the mental illness. I had heard about something like that with schizophrenia, actually.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
Before we get too far down like a digital rabbit hole, I was wondering like about talking about living rural, you know, not just as a person, but as like an astrologer, like, you like your physical experience of living that way, like, you know, like how, if like just the sky and the stars itself, you know, it's like, sometimes I think about the sky is like literally half of our landscape, even though we don't get to physically touch it so much, you know, like,
yeah.
And that like living, you know, as an astrologer, it's like, okay, well, why would you live like in a place like that so far away from like people and other astrologers and things like this? But you're like, well, you know, like you are like an intimate connection with the stars in the sky. And I feel like with certain stars in particular, you start to like have like a really intimate relationship with, you know, like where every time it comes around, every time you see it, you're like, oh, that's my star, you know, or that's
absolutely.
like, I'm really involved in that, especially as a magical practitioner as well, where you're like, okay, I get good results from that, or I like, you know, I have like a real rapport with the spirits that might reside there, or the communication that comes from there, or, you know, like certain timings that you're like, well, this is my jam, so I always wait for this to come around. And
yeah, absolutely. There's this rhythm. There's this, like, you just, when you do astrology, there's a rhythm already, but if you're just using a software or, you know, an ephemeris, you can see that rhythm, but it's not the same as the natural, like actually seeing the rhythm. Even just the moon cycle, you know, seeing like the moon progress to like full to waning and really just participating in that rhythm. I don't know. It's obviously essential. I mean, I do go to Montreal sometime to visit friends and stuff, and I'm still like, okay, I'm looking in the sky for my points of reference because it's like drinking water or something now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, there's the whole reflective aspect also that the quiet of being in nature allows me. I think living off-grid in nature is a sacrifice in some ways, but also it's a privilege. Every day I see it as a privilege, for sure. If I lived in the city, I probably would not have time to do as much contemplation and reflection with astrology. I think, you know, like living in the city is a lot more expensive, like rent and all this stuff, like expense going out with people, or I don't know. I just feel like when you're in the city, you're more distracted by needs and bills and stuff like that. So in a sense, for me, being off grid in nature is sort of the sweet spot I found to be an astrologer. I always imagined that, like, if I live in the city, I can still be an astrologer, but not the same way.
Yeah.
I feel like there would be so many other things occupying my attention or something. And then you get caught on in the collective psyche that resides in the city, and you get carried away into like, oh, I should market this, or oh, I should do astrology night, or I should,
Yeah, totally.
I'm so not inclined to want to make money with my practice, which is probably my downfall as a business person. But it's so much more. Astrology is so much more to me, and living rural allows me to be that, to sort of live my truth in regards to that, and not feel rushed to produce and make money and put myself out there and make publicity and all this stuff. I'm just sort of, like I said, I'm satisfied.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and like you said, like kind of, and it's interesting about like what you might see how the astrology is playing out as you're observing it. When you're like, oh, this aspect is happening, let's see what happens, and it's very easy to see it in like people's behavior or just weird, like what movie like you get from Netflix or whatever, and you're like, oh my god, that's so like we just got on this weird movie kick where everything seemed to be like related to Mars and Cancer, like
interesting.
There's like, oh, it's, we get DVDs in the mail from the Netflix subscription, and it's like the one it sent us was like Killer Nuns, and then like, and then we watched like the new Suspiria movie, and then, but like that just was how it like queued up, and like this, like, it was just like all these themes of like, and then in like life too, themes of like my grandmother has just had surgery and she's really stressing out my mom, and like, and then we just went to my wife's like grandmother's 90th birthday party, and like it was like all of this like turmoil and like tension around like issues with like mothers and their daughters who are mothers, and then their daughters, as well, like, and so that's like one way that you see it like play out a lot with people, and you can observe that really readily in a city. You can see it everywhere, but when you're living outside of the city in nature, like it's like really interesting to see how the astrology might be playing out like in animal behavior or in like weather patterns. Like I always notice like when there's a big Neptune aspect, there's like, you'll like really commonly see like fog or floods. You
guys get fog too a lot?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
The moon in Pisces on Monday, we had so much fog.
Oh yeah, same. Totally same. Yeah, it was all fogged out.
Foggy weather.
yeah. They'll be like.
Sorry, you can finish your phrase. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you know Jeffrey Cornelius?
Oh.
He's like a writer. He wrote a book called The Moment of Astrology.
Yeah.
He's like a guy from England. Anyways, he always talks about the participatory nature of divination. I feel like, there's always a debate, like, what is astrology? Is it divination? Is it an art? Is it a language? But when it comes to seeing transit play out, that's when, there's something really participatory. It can be like internal, or like you said, when you're in the city, it could be external because you're in situation and scenarios.
Yeah, like people and media. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't watch much TV here. We have 2 channels, so I watch like Joe Party. I've been watching Joe Party because there's like a guy that's been winning like crazy for like
right, totally. I haven't seen it, but people have told me about it. It's like a phenomenon.
Yeah, so that's my excitement when it comes to TV. I'm like, oh, I must watch Joe Party now. But in the weather, definitely, although there's not very much sun here, the wind, I pay attention to the wind a lot, and which direction is coming and stuff, because, and it's the same thing for you, the wind we get is the wind that's coming from the south, and it's the Gulf Stream, and then it moves up, and it's the wind that's on its way to Europe, basically. So any storms that are on the way to Europe passes to you and then passes to me, and it carries so much with it. And when it gets here on the coast of St. John's on the East Coast, it's the most northerly point of North America, the most easterly point of North America. It really is so potent. It has like travel all this continent, and you can really feel what it's carrying, you know?
Yeah, totally.
I'm sure it's like that for you. You guys get a lot of wind in the Maine?
Yeah, we get like from coming from the north, from the tundra, and then coming from the west a lot, and then we get it, the Gulf Stream, like you're saying, off the ocean. So really different weather systems depending on which way it comes from. And that makes me think, when you're looking at astrology all the time, and then you're looking at seasonality and directionality, and you're looking at things that happen in Libra and things that happen in Aries, etc., and being able to kind of see see some of that wind coming from different directions, and referencing like what in magical traditions, like the four kings might represent, of like the four cardinal directions, and
absolutely,
and like the houses, like seeing the east, looking to the east and seeing the first house, and then looking to the west and seeing the seventh house, and looking, to the south and seeing the 10th house, and to the north and seeing the fourth house, and like,
and it's interesting that you say that now, because I've never actually put the two and two together, but north is really associated with ancestors, and that's interesting. That would be the fourth house. I never even put two and two together until now.
Yeah, I guess like, because looking to the south, is like you're seeing like the top of the ecliptic because of or at least where we live in the northern hemisphere, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And then so if you look, it's just like you turn your back to that, and the fourth house would be there, but maybe like down below, like down beneath you, but kind of facing more north than south.
Yeah, because I always conceptualize the rising, obviously, but I've stopped there.
Right.
When I'm conceptualizing things, especially like with the cycle of Venus here, like I can see her so clearly when she's setting after the sun here. The horizon is just perfect because we're at the ocean level, and so like that's probably one of the best planet to see here. Just Venus cycle. And last year or 2 years ago, maybe it was summer, she was next to the Pleiades, and I got really good pictures, and you could just see everything so clearly. It was really breathtaking. And then I would go back and forth from like my eyes to my software, because I was looking at
it totally
rising in real time,
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this is unbelievable. Like this, like astrology and astronomy together is just complete,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think that's like, if astrologers haven't spent much time out with the sky, like it's definitely worth planning some camping trips. Cause like, I was going to ask you about the, or just comment on like, living rural, and one like the morning star and evening star becomes really apparent, like,
oh yeah, it's so beautiful. It's just like, like you said, you were saying that you feel certain connection to stars. For me, it's Venus. I'm just like Venus girl or guy. I'm totally just completely hypnotized by her, metaphorically in my life in general, and like physically when I see Venus, I'm just completely mesmerized. I have hundreds of pictures of Venus. I'm actually exhibiting next month in a cafe, and it's all Venus pictures.
Oh, awesome.
But she loves it. She wants to be broadcast.
Totally. Yeah, I wonder if you've noticed before, a couple years ago when Venus was very, very bright, and it was evening star, and I was outside with a friend, and they're not an astrologer, and they were like, "What is that? That is like so crazy." And I was like, "Oh, that's Venus." And we were looking at it, and they were like, "That's crazy that it's Venus, because you can almost see it looks like a pentagram. Like it almost looked like the way it was shining. You could almost see it as like a 5-pointed star,
Yeah, absolutely. I've captured that on camera, actually, just the little spikes, like.
Yeah, totally. It's crazy.
And also, I loved phosphorus and what's the one? I can't remember now the names for her. There's like so many different names for her.
Hesperus and phosphorus.
Yeah, and then Lucifer too. It makes so much sense that Lucifer, like, I don't know, just like the whole sort of what the word arises in people's consciousness and seeing the power of Venus. I feel like something happened along the way, obviously, but I just feel like she carries that name really well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so like weather patterns, like seeing the stars, like we were talking, like Neptune and floods and fog, and then I often see like Uranus aspects and lightning, and that's like a easy association. But like even in times of year where there's not typically going to be lightning, like in the middle of the winter, like when you don't get like a thunderstorm, there's been some sort of weird, like, staticky thing happening in the atmosphere where there's some sort of flashing dry lightning or something. And I'm like, wow, this...
We don't get lightning in Newfoundland.
Oh, really? Wow.
I haven't really seen it here. Not very much. I don't think I've seen it on the East Coast here at all, actually. Yeah, for the most part, it's just gray, rain, fog, and windy. But like I said, I lived and worked in a lot of different places, and I was working in BC 2 years ago when there was crazy fires. I can't remember the aspect there was now, but it was so obvious. I was like, yeah, this is what it is. We got evacuated and stuff.
Wow.
From the fires because it was just so crazy. And I can't remember the aspect now, but at the time it was like, yeah, this is what it is. But for the most part, I think the reason I love being in the fog here and I'm so in love with this sort of gray coast is that it's very internalizing. There's just something, you talk about like seeing astrological aspect play out outside in nature and stuff like that, yes. But I feel like I internalize a lot of like, yeah, it's sort of like a mood,
Yeah, totally.
And then I try to translate it for people by writing, or often it's just by image, or even just a word or something. I have an easier time with image than words. But
yeah, and I think that's like one of the things I first noticed about your forecasts and like from social media and seeing your posts and like reading your forecasts and seeing the image that you selected and like really relating with it, that like, like forecasting is like kind of its own thing, like where you're like how to be like, okay, here are all the aspects. How are we going to put them into language, and how are we going to kind of like use, I think you said before, is like astrology as an intelligence itself,
Yeah.
And like how you select like you're taking in so many different pieces of information from like the array of all the patterns of aspects you're trying to select that you're going to portray and say this next week is going to be like this, and then going and finding like an image that like rings every bell, Yeah,
I think that's the hardest thing, especially for people that when you start writing, like astrologer that starts writing forecasts like that, the hardest thing is to not talk about everything. Because, you're excited as an astrologer, you want to break it down and talk about everything, but 80% of the readers don't really understand astrology as you do as an astrologer. So you really have to find other ways to convey it. So that's how I started with images first, because I thought, okay, if I go into detail on my forecast, at least people will be resonating with the image. A lot of people that don't know what I'm talking about, like conjunct, blah, 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 they don't know. Like they don't know. And with time, that's what when I first started, when I was a student and started writing online and stuff, I was losing people, like my family and stuff. My friends were reading me and they were like, it seems really interesting, but I just don't get it. I don't understand,
Right.
So you can make decision as an astrologer. You can either write for other astrologers or astrology enthusiasts, or you can also just try to convey it the best way for everybody, you know? So that's at the point I'm at now. And I think that's why the selection of images. So usually if I write a forecast, I'm going to sit down with everything. I'm going to delineate everything. I'm going to take like 2 hours, delineate everything, look at it in the bigger scope of things too. And I'm sort of it's like a sort of meditation. I try to really sort of digest it and feel it. And then I go on a crazy Google sort of frenzy image Google, like, and until I find the image, sometimes it can be like an hour, 2 hours, sometimes it's half hour. But it's really important for me to, if I have time, most of the time I do, sometimes I don't. But I feel like at least, even if somebody just grasps a little bit of the words and then they connect with the image, that way they can integrate the knowledge without having to integrate the intellectual part of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think, that where it goes, all those notions go across like living in the landscape and feeling the astrology in your body as a language, being like looking at the shades of like the bark of a tree and be like, wow, that's really changed. It's much more Venusian looking now, and like taking all that sensory information and then looking at the aspects itself. And like, cause if like tarot, for instance, and they were like, well, is the history of tarot really like from some, like secret, like Kabbalistic knowledge? And you're like, well, probably not. But like the everyone thought astrologically, like in the Renaissance, so like what was produced was from an astrological kind of like symbol making, system meaning making, understanding mind, and like that you come to live in that mind as an astrologer. So every single thing you look at is like speaking to you in these signifiers and these archetypes, and
absolutely. Yeah. It's the most beautiful thing. I think that's why people who study astrology never come back from it, because once you do that, you're just like, how can I live without that? It's like an upgrade. It's like a software upgrade.
Yeah, totally.
I have this lens that allows me to absolutely like feel things at a completely different level. And on top of it, not feel things if I don't want to. I can just back off and objectively look at what's going on and be like, yeah, that'll pass because that's just the moon like in the hole with Pluto and Saturn right now,
Yeah, totally. And as like a magical practitioner, to actually kind of be like, I'm not going to let so much of that come into my life right now,
Absolutely. But that's where I think magic and astrology intersect, and you don't really have a choice. If you study astrology, at some point you're going to come across magic, because astrology has been utilized in tandem with magic forever. I think, some of the motivation of astrologer, 2,000 years ago was for magical purpose. We use the word magic, but it's not necessarily magic. It's just participating with existence, knowing the time, knowing the,
Yeah.
I find it's just magic is such a loaded word.
Totally.
There's too many associations. With it now, it's just been corrupted almost. And I feel like we all have that potential, and then astrology gives us that weather,
Yeah. It's interesting now seeing, magic coming back into acceptance within the astrological culture, and being like, oh no, look, there are these texts that like it's a whole wing of astrology. There's like electional, there's like horary, there's like mundane, there's natal, and like we can pick up 4 or 5 texts here and say like, well, these are magical texts and they're astrological texts. So that's just historically, that's just how it is. But a lot of those are like talismanic in nature. But it's interesting, like practicing magic as an astrologer, that's not only just the talismanic protocol magic. You know what I mean?
No, you become, I personally, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I've just become I always sort of lived in a symbolic way. Even before I knew the language of astrology, I sort of created a little ritual. I think, I think it's human nature to do that. But then astrology gives you a framework to work within that's so precise that like it would be silly not to. And I think, if you look back, like Baghdad is a talisman. Like Baghdad was found, like it was selected to be like a giant talisman.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
I mean, astrology always had that purpose because it's knowledge of when it's good to do certain things, and it's just about defining what is magic,
Right, totally. I guess I mean, like, when you're doing talismanic magic, you're doing magic certainly, and you're doing astrology certainly, but when you're doing, like, say as a magician, doing like dream work or more like journeying or body based work or like visionary work or certain kinds of sorcery that aren't just like, not just the electionally based influence of astrology, but like kind of like being able to kind of get in that place where like you're saying, you have that upgrade in consciousness, like, or symbolic processing or pattern processing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I was telling you I was kind of contemplating a Venus election a couple of days ago. Then I decided not to. The next morning, really early, I had a dream. Probably Venus was rising at that time because Venus has been rising at around like 4:30 here. And I dream of this woman dancing, this black woman dancing, like gyrating her hips, all sweaty. Like, it was crazy. It was like absolutely out of this world. And when I woke up, I was like, okay, I didn't get up to do my Venus election, but she definitely came to me,
Yeah.
I saw her. And if I didn't have the knowledge of astrology, I mean, these dreams might happen, but it just becomes sort of more complex, and it informs me too. I'm not just learning about Venus through books, I'm learning about Venus through like experience.
Yeah.
Like we were saying, nature outside, but also, for me there's a lot of internal process, so dreams. So Venus came to me, and then for the next couple of days I've just been thinking about gyrating hips and stuff like that, and associating it with Venus,
Yeah.
And it just kind of adds to my knowledge in that way. But it was also at the time Venus was rising, and I was contemplating doing a magical election. But I was really satisfied with just that. Honestly, I'm not like, I like the materiality and materializing certain things, but I'm also happy to just experience it.
Yeah, totally. I totally hear you. And I think that's kind of like exactly what I was kind of getting at, is what you were saying about like, you're doing the work, what the language is, what the archetypes are. And from like an animistic point of view, you get that actual feedback where the intelligence or the spirits of Venus are speaking to you, and you can kind of
Absolutely.
Like incorporate that. Because like when spirits speak to you, it's an interface with your thoughts and outside thoughts, and they kind of make these like blended images in the imaginal space in your mind that's a lot more operative than people often think. Like the imagination is just for either making art or just kind of daydreaming or something, but that you can do a lot more with it, like if you kind of point it around and let it be receptive, like transceive, like transmit and receive,
I couldn't have said it better. It's exactly it. And I was like, because for the last week I've been sort of putting myself in that space. When you're going to do a working with a planet, you prepare, and then it sort of start coming to you slowly and stuff until the day you decide to do maybe a working or something. For the last week, some like people have been giving me flowers. There's been like, it's just slowly been building up. And then I decided not to do the workings, but I still had like a very vivid image. And so I knew that I was communicating, I was in communion. And in a sense, that's good enough for me. It's sort of like a petition, or it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, totally. It's not like,
it's a confirmation.
It's not as cause and effect, like allopathic, like I did the petition and I got the result and I can like note it in my notebook or something. It's like,
that's the problem I have, is I guess I'm not, like we were talking, I'm materialistic. I love jewelry. I love clothes, blah, blah, blah. But in a bigger sense, I'm never driven by material, like acquiring something or getting the love of a man or being rich and famous. Like, obviously, there's some part of me that maybe wants that, but I would not waste waste Venus time asking for like
Yeah.
petty stuff like that. I feel like it's just I don't know, it's too mundane. I just feel like I don't want to reduce it to that. And so I feel like in a lot of magical circle, like in forums on Facebook and stuff, so many people are like, "Oh, I'm broke, I don't have money, I need a talisman for this and this and that." And I just don't yeah, I don't want to be at that. I'm not like, I'm going to build you a Venus talisman so you can attract love. I mean, astrology has been doing that forever, but there's parts of me that resist that aspect of the whole business. I kind of want to be anti-business in that sense.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in education and experience, and obviously, yeah, like I could contradict myself tomorrow. I'm still very materialistic and all that. That's not what I mean so much, but I don't know. I think you get what I mean.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think like Venus is like, especially in Taurus, like sensual experience of the world includes, like what you're saying is like materialistic, like jewelry, but it's like it loves materials and craft and the like glimmer of this ring and the feeling of this fabric, and that's just part of her nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I just meant more in general, like astrological magic purposes in general.
Yeah,
I
totally.
feel
Yeah.
like it would be a waste to just like be like, "Oh, please, Venus, bring me the love of my life." Because deep down, I know that that's just not like, that doesn't, like, love kind of, it's a choice,
Yeah.
Like, you sort of have to participate yourself and do things if you want things to happen. I don't know. I'm sort of interested in the higher expressions somehow. And I guess that's always been the problem with internet and marketing myself as an astrologer and like offering 2-for-1 readings on Instagram or something.
Right.
I just like never, I have this resistance to reducing the craft to like, and I don't have anything against people doing it. I respect and admire a lot of people that do that. I just have this reflex in myself where I'm just like, no, I can't do it. I'll go and I do 10-hour baking shift before selling out like myself.
Yeah,
like that.
Right.
I can't. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
it just doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, it's like a thin line for sure. Like where the like wheeling and dealing like starts and ends,
Yeah, and like it's such a beautiful opportunity to have internet and Instagram and to market yourself as an astrologer. And I don't know, I'm just, I was contacted by certain apps to participate, and I'm just like so conflicted about the whole thing. It's just something that is not resolved within me, so I'm just not. Yeah, and like writing horoscopes for magazines and websites and stuff. I mean, it pays so well when you're an astrologer to do that, and it's in your advantage if you want to be a full-time astrologer to seek these sort of contracts. But once again, living rurally, I don't have as much expenses, and that's the choices I make.
Yeah, totally. No, I hear you. I want to go back a little bit to what we were saying about results driven like talismans or magic versus like kind of like receiving that transmission of like kind of the gyrating hips and like that being
Yeah.
like, because I'm really with you there. And that's like, there's such with like words like witchcraft, like becoming so like mediaized, it's hard to reference them anymore and to like make like intelligible sense out of that, like on like a scale that communicates across the board. But like, it seems like I like this area where like working, astrologically and then in a lived experience of like what in witchcraft terms would be like maybe phrases like just the process of becoming like the other, like, and like, and living in that, rather than living in logos, like living in like therio forms, more primal. Like it's something I've been thinking a lot about with like the lunar mansions, and I noticed you pay a lot of attention to the moon in a way, in the lunar cycle, in a way that I really like in your forecasting style, and that that you live in the lunar cycle, and your body is in the lunar cycle, and your mind is in the lunar cycle, and so is your imagination and your dreams, and that being in that rhythm and kind of getting to be able to pick up on different animation, images and animations, as the moon goes around and meets all the planets and goes through all the signs and all the rulerships, and what to do with all of that, with all the gyrating hips or whatever else it creates, and how to weave that into your life. I want to see more of that in astrology and what happens with astrology, rather than just predicting or counseling or results driven magic, where it's kind of a creative, it goes into something creative, and something that feeds back into itself and becomes more and more involved, with the other and with the numinous, where it's we're allowing astrology to be a guide and a teacher to us through that ability to kind of think and feel and express, let the archetypes do the work and present themselves as they are, in an imaginal way, maybe more similar to what the Egyptians might have been doing with stellar magic, and kind of deliver to us a wealth of creative imaginal image, I don't even know exactly what to call it, access to more and to more worlds, that there's a real separation between what is magic, what is witchcraft, what is astrology, and blending them is really dangerous for when it comes from an uninformed place, just because it gets muddy and you lose definition or rigor. But they do need to be blended, but carefully, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I think there's just a lot of because of social media, a lot of people have access to all of these ideas, these thoughts, people that read you or read anybody in astrologer or magic and stuff, but people don't know the language, so only little pieces get taken. And we're in the era of Harry Potter and all of these things too, so it gets confused, everything gets confused together. So, and like you said, I think the clarity and it's important to really understand what each language is about before you can sort of start blending everything together and really do a synthesis of what it means to, and I mean, not everybody has the time for contemplation and for understanding these language, and that's the role of the astrologer and magician to translate, but that's why I'm really careful on social media too. It's just, I don't really claim to be doing things so much as I just want to show people what they can do with the simple lunar rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people that read me don't know the language of astrology, and I always have them in mind. I'm okay, well, I can give them little pieces that will help them understand a little bit more of the language, and also the physicality, the experiential part of it, so that they can start feeling it,
Yeah, totally.
As opposed to just being an intellectual sort of thing. I have somebody that I work with who doesn't know at all the astrology, use the CoStar app, and that's fine, whatever. But she was having her Mars return this week, so I was I really got her into that space, the Mars return, and it's on her ascendant, and she has that in Cancer. So I was I just sent her all sorts of things that she could do to really tune into that return, so that she would know what that Mars means for her in her life in general, in her chart, how it shows up, So I tried to show her how to attune to that Mars return by doing sort of Mars and Cancer activities. And she's a baker, so that was easy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the best way as an astrologer I've found, like just kind of tuning people into the tonality so they can find their own tonality, because I'm not the other person. I don't know how they experience a transit or how they experience their natal chart. I can just express the symbols, but ultimately the best thing you can do as an astrologer is show people how to attune to the language, you know?
Yeah, totally. I like that example of like the baker, like, yeah, you can kind of be like, here's like a big list of things that you can try and see if one of them really like resonates. Yeah, you're like, yeah, like if, like you said, like I know someone who, like has like the moon in the second house in, Pisces, and like, they like, like taught sailing like for money for a while, and then they stopped that, and now they like, now like they also bake, but they're always like stretching dough and like,
That's awesome.
like cheese, and like, you know what I mean? And it's like, and it's near the ocean, like it's near the bay where they do it, and so it's like, yeah, it's like the same thing, even though it's, you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, when someone's having a transit, like being like, oh, well, here's a list of a bunch of physical things you can go and experience that might just like not trigger, but just like you said, like resonate with, or it is like a kind of tuning, like when you're tuning an instrument and you hear that harmonic, and you're like, okay, yeah, there it is. Like,
yeah, you have to exaggerate it, I think, for people in order for them to see it. Do you remember when you started learning astrology, how maybe you focused a little bit on your ascendant, maybe your moon, and then just dismiss everything else, like it just all clumped together, and you were kind of happy just sort of having the rising, let's say, and then the more you understand, the more you realize how complex and multi-layered and very different it is, but you can only get there once you know. So I feel like people who don't know, you really have to exaggerate these placements, make it really, really obvious. That's why, like, an hour consultation, you could spend it just talking about the moon.
Yeah, right.
And there's so much to say, and it's the same thing for forecasting. Like, when I go on Instagram, I'm like, I have so much to say, but it's not worth my time, because most people will not even, comprehend, because it's too complex to comprehend in an Instagram post with the attention span that we have now, So I'm like, I'll just focus on the moon and the sort of wave that it creates this week, and that's it, exaggerate that aspect or whatever.
Yeah. I think like the moon kind of needs to be exaggerated right now, like especially magically too. I feel like there's a lot of like rushing towards a million things you could do, where the moon could probably tell us a lot and give us a lot of results and put us. I've been thinking a lot about the lunar mansions and kind of like kind of the animal lists that come from like the Greek magical papyri, and like,
yeah.
And just kind of like, okay, well, there's this like circle of animals that's available, like, that is like a real rhythm, and it drifts like from the 24-hour day rhythm. So it's like sometimes the moon will ingress into a new lunar mansion in the middle of one of our calendar days, and that makes it kind of confusing to try to sync up on it. It's not just like, well, what is it in today, but like, but
it changes halfway through a sign.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, I love reading your stuff. You're like one of the only astrologer I know that like forecast lunar mansion. Is awesome. It's great for astrologers. For me, I'm like, yes, I don't have to actually dig in my books. I can just go read
totally.
your stuff.
Right. That's partly what I've been trying to do, is like get people to give them the opportunity to put the book down, and like I have to like do double book,
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of work. Yeah, I'm just being lazy with the moon.
But like I'm kind of switching my goal from being like presenting a ton of information just so people know, every day the moon is doing things that are like, there's just like an insane amount of opportunity coming from just what the moon's doing every day, but trying to start to simplify it so you can internalize it. So you're like, once you go through the 28 mansions, like a few times of just like, okay, now, and I want to start calling them by the animal name rather than like the first mansion or the second mansion, you know, like be like, okay, like it's going to go from like ox to sphinx and it's going to repeat. And if you just track that every day and like live with it, like I'm wondering how fast it can start being like that. You just know, you know, that you're like,
you see it. Yeah. Because I know what's rising most of the time. Now, you know, just
right, totally. Yeah, totally.
So it would be the same thing. Yeah.
So you're just like, oh, I know it's cat right now, you know, like, and just,
yeah, exactly. It makes sense because this or that.
Yeah. It wouldn't take too long. I mean, it's like you get, everyone, like people know what sign the moon is in, what like solar sign, you know, like, but it's like 28 rather than 12, but like, it seems like it would probably work out that you'd get this body rhythm of it. And I think that's really important to like kind of put it in the body first and then kind of like live with it, you know?
Well, that's how you get the best information. It's firsthand information. Every time I read a book, like especially astrological magic, like the Picatrix or Agrippa or, you know, I'm always like, okay, this is the only book that remains from a whole huge tradition. How do we know really? Like I love following it, but it's not something I follow to the letter because I'm like my experience is more important.
Yeah,
you know?
and like they had such agendas, you know, like
yeah, exactly.
The authors of the Picatrix are obviously up, you know, a lot of times up to something that we're just not going to be up to. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know when the last time I like sieged a city was, you know.
And I mean, you can translate that into other affairs, obviously, and it's nice to have a guideline. But I'm always like, I will always favor experience.
Yeah.
And just to return to the moon briefly, also, even just in regards to theory, the moon like carries the light of the sun. She is sort of the translator of everything else that is going on.
Yeah,
and I think
totally.
that was my main motivation for starting to write about the moon. Also because I started writing on Mondays. I was like, this is perfect. I'll just write about the moon on Mondays. Because she translates everything else that's going on, the bigger aspects. So, you know, like I was curious to see now that midweek with Mars in Cancer and the moon in Aries right now, how that would sort of show up because, yeah, it's been a while since Mars was in Cancer and, you know, that's how I sort of look at the bigger transit. I always kind of try to look at it with the moon as if it was a magnifying glass.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. And as it gets like, as it waxes and wanes, the different things that it's going to do, like, it's like, oh, it's going to like increase, like, you know, it's going to be bringing in more stuff, or now it's going to be draining stuff out, or like what kind of divination happens, like, you know, when the moon is, it's a different kind of divination that you can do when the moon is like loading you up, like when the magnifying glass is like really on, and there's also like a spotlight on, and like it's really juiced up, like a work light or something, you know, like,
yeah, exactly.
And then what kind of divination you can do when all the lights are off and you can see things like, you can kind of see through like all the mumbo jumbo, and it's like the veil is thin and you can kind of hear the whispers, you know, like
my favorite time of the month.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally. I know. Like,
and I'm really looking forward to this weekend because the moon will be very dark in Taurus with Venus just before the new moon. I'm really, really looking forward to that.
Totally, me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe that's a good time to pause then, because
absolutely, yeah, we've been chatting for a long time.
Well, thanks very much for doing this, and definitely want to talk to you more. There's other stuff I want to talk to you about, but maybe this is good for today, and we can like get another behind the scenes communication going and talk
absolutely.
Again in the future.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Liminal Light. Our guest today was Elodie St-Onge-Aubut, Elodie Miaow on social media, and ninthhouseastrology.com on the World Wide Web. I'm Chris Puchere Rapucci, and you can find me at atavisceral.com ATAVISCERAL.com, where I post articles and forecasts, offer chart readings, astrological consultations, divinations, occult services, and more. The show was on hiatus for a few months this past winter, but now I should be going full steam ahead once again. So look out for more interviews soon with artists, musicians, astrologers, magicians, poets, ritualists, and those who live life with a little extra attention. Thanks very much. Ciao.